Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper, where forgotten civilizations, unexplained wonders, and ancient secrets come back to life. Ready to unravel the mystery? Let's begin the journey. In 1996, the small Brazilian city of Varginha became the center of a story that sounds like it's straight from a science fiction movie. Dozens of people reported seeing a UFO crash and its strange, non-human survivors wandering through the city. Often called Brazil's Roswell, the Varginha incident remains one of the most compelling and controversial UFO cases in history. The story of the Varginha incident does not begin with a lone, isolated witness on a deserted country road. It begins with an entire city, and it unfolds not in the dead of night, but in the bright, clear light of day. Our story takes us to the city of Varginha, a bustling mid-sized city in the state of Minas Gerais in southern Brazil. It is a city known for its coffee production and its thriving economy. It was, in January of 1996, a perfectly ordinary place, a city going about its daily business. But on one fateful Saturday, January 20th, a series of bizarre and terrifying events would unfold that would shatter that normality forever, turning Varginha from a quiet regional hub into the epicenter of what many consider to be the most significant and credible UFO event in modern history. This is the story of the day the aliens, according to dozens of witnesses, came to town. The first whispers of something strange began in the very early hours of that Saturday morning. Sometime after 1 a.m., the American and Brazilian militaries began to track an unidentified flying object on their radar systems. The object was over the state of Minas Gerais and was not responding to any attempts at communication. It was an unknown, an intruder in Brazilian airspace. According to later testimony from alleged military insiders, a silent, coordinated operation was set in motion. A few hours later, in the countryside just outside of Varginha, a local farmer and his wife, a couple named Aurelina and Eurico de Freitas, were woken from their sleep by the sound of their farm animals panicking. They looked out their window and saw something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. A large, silent, cigar-shaped object, about the size of a school bus, was hovering low over their fields. It had no lights, it made no noise, and it was emitting what looked like smoke or vapor. They watched in terrified silence as the object seemed to lose altitude, descending slowly and unsteadily towards the ground before disappearing from their view behind a ridge. They were convinced they had just witnessed a crash. As the sun rose on the morning of January 20th, the strangeness continued. The local fire department in Varginha, the Corpo de Bombeiros, began to receive a series of unusual and cryptic calls. The calls were not from panicked civilians, but reportedly from the military itself. The firemen were told to be on standby for a strange mission. They were instructed to go to a specific area in the Jardim Andir neighborhood, a residential area on the outskirts of the city, and to capture a wild animal. This was a strange request. The fire department was equipped to handle many things, but capturing an unidentified wild animal was not a typical part of their duties. Nevertheless, they followed their orders. A fire truck was dispatched to the location. According to later witness accounts, the mission was a success. The firemen, using nets and other equipment, managed to capture a strange creature. It was described as being small, about 3 to 4 feet tall, with slick brown skin. They placed it in a wooden box, loaded it onto their truck, and under military escort delivered it to a nearby army base. The official fire department log for that day would later contain a simple, enigmatic entry: the capture of a strange animal. For most of the city of Varginha, the day was proceeding as normal. But in the mid-afternoon, around 3:30 p.m., the story would take its most famous and dramatic turn. 3 young women, 2 sisters named Liliane and Valkyria Fatima Silva, and their friend Katia Andrade Xavier, were walking home from their jobs. They were aged between 14 and 22. To save time, they decided to take a shortcut through a vacant lot in the same Jardim Andir neighborhood where the fire department had been operating that morning. It was a dusty, barren piece of land, bordered by a high wall and a small medical clinic. As they walked through the lot, they were suddenly overcome by a strange and powerful smell, a sharp, pungent odor that some would later describe as being like ammonia. And then they saw it. Crouched next to the wall, in a position that seemed weak and dazed, was a creature unlike anything they had ever seen or imagined. The three women froze, their blood running cold. The creature was small, only about 3.5 feet tall. It had a very thin, frail-looking body. Its skin was a dark, brownish color, and it appeared to be slick and oily, as if it were covered in some kind of grease. It had long, delicate arms and legs, with large three-fingered hands. But it was the head that was most terrifying. It was enormous in proportion to its body, with a narrow chin and a wide, bulging cranium. And set into that giant head were two huge, almond-shaped eyes that glowed with a deep, ruby-red color. The creature had no discernible nose or mouth, only small slits. And on the top of its head, there were 3 small, horn-like protuberances. The creature seemed to be in distress. It was not moving aggressively. It was simply crouched there, its giant red eyes seemingly fixed on them. The young women would later describe the immense feeling of fear and pity that washed over them. The creature looked scared, pathetic, and in pain. Lily Ann, the oldest of the sisters, was so terrified that she let out a scream. The creature, startled by the noise, seemed to react. It slowly turned its head to look at them, and in that moment, the 3 women were overcome with the primal instinctual terror. They turned and ran, screaming, convinced they had just come face to face with the devil himself. They ran all the way to their mother's house, arriving in a state of near hysterical panic. Their mother, Louisa, tried to calm them down, but they were inconsolable, repeating over and over again that they had seen the devil in the vacant lot. Their mother, though skeptical, could see the genuine terror in their eyes. She went back to the lot with them a short time later, but the creature was gone. There was nothing left but a strange, pungent smell lingering in the air and a single strange footprint in the dirt. The story of the 3 young women's encounter quickly spread through their neighborhood. But it was just one piece of a much larger and more complex puzzle that was unfolding across the city that day. As the afternoon turned into evening, more and more reports began to surface of a massive and unusual military presence in Virginia. Residents reported seeing numerous army trucks, convoys of military vehicles, and soldiers, many in unmarked uniforms, sealing off streets and conducting searches in various parts of the city. This was not a normal occurrence. Virginia was not a major military hub, and this level of activity was completely unprecedented. The military seemed to be engaged in a citywide manhunt, but no one knew what they were looking for. According to later testimony from anonymous military sources and civilian witnesses, the Army was hunting for the surviving crew members of the UFO that had allegedly crashed that morning. It seemed that not just one, but several of the creatures had survived the crash and were now lost and wandering through the outskirts of the city. The military, in a desperate attempt to contain the situation and maintain secrecy, had launched a massive operation to round them all up. Later that evening, another key event is said to have occurred. A young military police officer named Marco Eli Cherez was on patrol with his partner. They received a call to investigate a strange sighting in a wooded area near the city zoo. When they arrived, they reportedly found another one of the strange, brown-skinned creatures. Following their training, they managed to capture it. According to some accounts, Officer Cherez, in the heat of the moment, handled the creature with his bare hands, without wearing protective gloves. He and his partner then transported the captured being to a local clinic for examination before it was handed over to the Army. By the end of that single day, Saturday, January 20, 1996, the story, as pieced together by ufologists and investigators, was this. A non-human craft had crashed near Virginia. The Brazilian military, possibly in coordination with American forces, had initiated a rapid response recovery operation. At least 2 and possibly more of the non-human crew members had been captured alive by local authorities and the military. One had been seen by 3 credible civilian witnesses in broad daylight. The entire operation was being conducted under a thick veil of secrecy, with the military attempting to control the flow of information and manage a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of control. The day the aliens came to Virginia was a day of chaos, fear, and incredible strangeness. The city was now at the center of a secret that the military was desperate to keep. But in a city of over 100,000 people, with dozens of witnesses, it was a secret that would prove impossible to contain. The events of that single day were just the beginning of a story that would soon evolve into one of the most complex and compelling tales of a government cover-up in the history of ufology. The events of January 20, 1996, left the city of Virginia reeling. The day had been a whirlwind of bizarre sightings, a massive and unexplained military presence, and a growing sense of fear and confusion. A UFO had allegedly crashed, and strange, non-human creatures had been seen and captured in the city's suburbs. But as the sun set on that fateful Saturday, the story of the Virginia incident entered a new and darker phase. The period of active, chaotic discovery was over. The period of denial, intimidation, and tragic consequences was about to begin. This is the story of the alleged cover-up, a systematic effort by the Brazilian military to erase the events of that day from history. An effort that would be met with a stubborn wave of resistance from dozens of witnesses, and would leave a trail of unanswered questions and a legacy of death. The first and most immediate response from the Brazilian military was a wall of absolute and total denial. As the story of the creature seen by the 3 young women began to spread like wildfire through the local, and then the national press, the military was forced to issue an official explanation for the events of that day. Their story was simple, mundane, and for many completely unbelievable. They flatly denied that any UFO had crashed or that any strange creatures had been captured. The massive military presence in Virginia on that day, they claimed, was nothing more than a coincidence. The Army trucks and personnel were simply being moved from one base to another, and Virginia just happened to be on their route. The fire department's involvement, they said, was a simple misunderstanding. And as for the creature that the Silva sisters and their friend had seen in the vacant lot, the military had an explanation for that too. They claimed that the young women had not seen an alien being from another world. They had simply seen a well-known local man, a homeless individual who was mentally and physically disabled, who was often seen squatting in that area. This man, they said, was nicknamed Medinho, and his physical condition, combined with the fact that he was likely covered in dirt, had caused the young women, in a moment of panic, to mistake him for a monster or a demon. This official explanation was designed to be a neat and tidy conclusion to the whole affair. It was an attempt to reduce a series of extraordinary events to a simple case of mistaken identity and mass hysteria. But for the researchers, the journalists, and the witnesses on the ground, the story had far too many holes. The Medinho explanation in particular seemed deeply flawed. The family of the man identified as Medinho came forward and stated that he could not have been the one in the vacant lot on that day, as he had a solid alibi. Furthermore, the 3 young women were adamant about what they saw. They were shown pictures of Medinho, and they all insisted that he was not the creature they had encountered. They were very clear in their description. The creature had a massive head, huge red eyes, 3 horns, and a slick, oily skin. This did not match the description of the local man at all. The official denial, instead of quelling the rumors, only added fuel to the fire. Felt too convenient, too dismissive. Felt like a cover story. And this is where the second part of the story begins. The flood of witnesses who came forward to contradict the official narrative. While the military presented a united front of denial, a steady stream of civilian and military personnel began to leak their own versions of the story to ufologists and journalists, most notably to a Brazilian researcher named Vittorio Paccaccini, who would become the leading investigator of the case. Most of these witnesses would only speak under the condition of anonymity, terrified of official reprisal. But their stories, when pieced together, painted a remarkably consistent picture of a crash, a capture, and a massive cover-up. Civilian witnesses from all over the city corroborated the unusual military activity. They described seeing military convoys blocking off roads, soldiers searching wooded areas, and strange, refrigerated trucks moving through the city in the middle of the night. But it was the testimony from the anonymous military and fire department sources that was the most explosive. These insiders gave detailed, step-by-step accounts of the recovery operation. They described the capture of not one, but at least two separate creatures. They described how the beings were transported first to a local clinic, then to the city's main hospital, and finally to a larger military base for study. One anonymous military source gave a detailed account of seeing one of the captured creatures up close. He described it as being incredibly fragile, with a strong, unpleasant smell, and making a low buzzing sound like the sound of a beehive. He also described the atmosphere of intense secrecy and fear that surrounded the entire operation. He claimed that everyone involved was given a direct order from the highest levels of the military command. They were to forget everything they had seen. They were told that the event never happened, and that if they ever spoke about it to anyone, they would face severe consequences, including imprisonment or worse. The three young women who had first seen the creature also reported being subjected to a campaign of intimidation. They claimed that strange, unidentified men in plain clothes began to follow them. They said they were approached and offered a large sum of money to publicly retract their story and say that they had made it all up. When they refused, the tone allegedly shifted to one of threats, with warnings about what might happen to them and their families if they continued to speak out. This pattern of official denial, coupled with witness intimidation, is a classic hallmark of a government cover-up. It suggested that the military was not just dismissing a fanciful story. It was actively trying to suppress a truth that it did not want the public to know. The sheer number of witnesses from different parts of the city and with different backgrounds, all telling a consistent story, made it very difficult to dismiss the incident as a simple case of mass hysteria. It seemed that something very real and very strange had indeed happened in Virginia, and the authorities were now engaged in a desperate and clumsy attempt to put the genie back in the bottle. This brings us to the final and most tragic element of the story: the deadly aftermath. The Virginia incident was not just a story of strange lights and mysterious creatures. It became a story of human cost. The first hint of this came from the first responders themselves. Many of the firemen and military personnel who were involved in the capture of the creatures reported a very specific and unusual detail. The beings emitted a powerful and noxious odor. The smell was described as being sharp and pungent, like a strong ammonia or a chemical solvent. Several of the men who were in close proximity to the creatures reported feeling dizzy and nauseous afterwards. This strange smell was one of the first clues that the beings were not just physically strange, but perhaps biologically hazardous as well. But the most tragic and compelling piece of evidence in the entire Virginia saga is the story of a 23-year-old military police officer named Marco Eli Cherez. According to the timeline of events pieced together by investigators, Officer Cherez was one of the first people to have direct, physical contact with one of the captured creatures on the evening of January 20th. He was allegedly part of the team that captured the second being, and in the heat of the moment, he is said to have handled the creature with his bare hands, without wearing any protective gloves. In the days and weeks following the incident, Officer Cherez's health began to rapidly decline. He developed a low-grade fever and complained of intense pain throughout his body, particularly in his back and joints. He went to the doctor, but they could not find a cause for his symptoms. His condition grew progressively worse. He was admitted to the hospital, where his situation became critical. His body began to fail. He developed a massive infection that spread throughout his system, and his organs began to shut down one by one. Less than a month after his encounter with the strange creature, on February 15, 1996, Officer Marco Eli Cherez died. The official cause of death was listed as a bacterial infection leading to septicemia, but his family never believed it. They were convinced that his death was a direct result of his contact with the alien being. They reported that in his final lucid moments, he told them about the strange creature he had captured and how he had touched its oily skin. They claimed that the doctors at the hospital seemed baffled by his condition, as if they were dealing with an infection that they had never seen before. The family's suspicions were amplified by the behavior of the military authorities after his death. They claimed that the military put immense pressure on them and on the doctors to keep quiet about the circumstances of his illness. An autopsy was performed, but the family was never given a full and clear report. They believe the military confiscated the medical records and deliberately obscured the true cause of his death to hide its connection to the events of January 20th. The death of Officer Cherez became the tragic, human heart of the Virginia conspiracy. For ufologists and believers, it was the ultimate proof. The story was no longer just about a crashed ship. It was about a biological consequence. It suggested that the alien beings were not only real, but that they were biohazardous to humans, perhaps carrying extraterrestrial microbes for which we have no immunity. And it suggested that the military was willing to let one of its own officers die, and then cover up the cause of his death in order to protect their great secret. The story of Officer Cherez transformed the Virginia incident from a fascinating UFO case into a dark and disturbing tale of government malfeasance and a fatal close encounter. It is this element, the tragic and verifiable death of a young man under mysterious circumstances directly following the event, that makes the Virginia case so much more compelling and so much more difficult to dismiss than other similar stories. It adds a layer of stark, human reality to a story that otherwise seems to be pure science fiction. The alleged cover-up had now become a fatal one, and the silence of the authorities seemed less like a simple denial and more like a guilty conscience. The Virginia incident is a puzzle with too many credible witnesses to be easily dismissed. Was it a case of mass hysteria and mistaken identity? Or did the Brazilian military really capture a crashed UFO and its alien crew, covering up the event with tragic consequences? The city of Virginia erected a statue of the creature, a permanent reminder of the day their town became the center of a galactic mystery. Lake Baikal in Siberia is the world's oldest and deepest lake, a place of immense mystery and strange phenomena. In 1982, during the height of the Cold War, a team of Soviet military divers on a training mission in its icy depths came face to face with something that should not exist: giant, humanoid beings swimming in the crushing darkness. Our story today takes us to one of the most magnificent and enigmatic places on our planet. It is a place of superlatives, a location that holds multiple world records. It is the world's oldest lake, having formed over 25 million years ago. It is the world's largest lake by volume, containing nearly a quarter of all the fresh water on the surface of the Earth. And most importantly for our story, it is the world's deepest lake, a vast inland ocean that plunges to a depth of over a mile, its bottom a cold, dark, and largely unexplored world. This is Lake Baikal, the Pearl of Siberia. For centuries, this immense body of water has been a source of reverence, mystery, and folklore for the people who live along its shores. They speak of strange monsters, of ghost ships, and of an inexplicable energy that seems to radiate from its icy depths. But in the year 1982, at the height of the Cold War, a secret military operation on the lake would give rise to a new and terrifying legend, a story of a fatal encounter between Soviet combat divers and a race of giant, humanoid beings living in the crushing darkness of the abyss. This is the story of the Lake Baikal incident, one of Russia's most bizarre and compelling UFO mysteries. The story begins in the summer of 1982. The Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States was at a fever pitch. Both superpowers were engaged in a relentless and secretive arms race, pushing the boundaries of military technology on land, in the air, at sea, and even in space. As part of this great geopolitical chess match, the Soviet military was conducting constant training exercises, preparing its elite soldiers for any and all possible combat scenarios. One such exercise was taking place at Lake Baikal. The lake's immense size, its extreme depth, and its remote location made it a perfect, discreet location for the Soviet Navy to train its elite combat divers, the men who were the equivalent of the U.S. Navy SEALs. These were not recreational scuba divers. They were highly trained, physically elite soldiers, the best of the best, tasked with performing covert operations in the most challenging underwater environments imaginable. A small team of 7 of these combat divers, along with their commanding officers and support staff, were stationed at a temporary military outpost on the shores of the lake. Their mission was a routine if demanding training dive. They were to descend to a depth of 50 meters, or roughly 165 feet, and perform a series of navigational and operational drills. While this is a significant depth, it was well within the normal operational parameters for these highly trained professionals. They were equipped with standard, but state-of-the-art, Soviet military diving gear. The water in Lake Baikal is notoriously cold, even in the summer, rarely rising above a few degrees Celsius at that depth. It is also exceptionally clear, with visibility sometimes exceeding 100 feet. But at a depth of 50 meters, much of the sunlight is filtered out, and the world becomes a dim twilight realm of deep blues and shadowy greens. The divers, secured in their cold water gear, entered the icy water and began their descent, moving silently down into the great dark heart of the ancient lake. The dive began as planned. The 7 men reached their target depth and started their training maneuvers. They were focused, disciplined, and going through the motions of a drill they had practiced many times before. And then everything changed. In the dim, ambient light of the deep water, they saw something. At first, it might have been a flicker of movement at the edge of their vision, something that didn't belong. They turned to look, and what they saw was so strange, so utterly impossible, that it defied all of their training and their understanding of the world. Moving with a strange, fluid grace through the icy water was a group of humanoid figures. There were 3 of them, and they were enormous. The divers would later report that these beings were nearly 10 feet tall, or a full 3 meters in height. They had the general shape of a human, with a head, a torso, 2 arms, and 2 legs. But the similarities ended there. The creatures were clad in some kind of tight-fitting, silvery suits, a material that shimmered and reflected the faint light from above. But the most shocking and inexplicable detail was what they weren't wearing. At a depth of 165 feet, in water that was just above freezing, any human diver would need a complex and bulky apparatus to survive. They would need a rebreather or scuba tanks to provide air, a thick wetsuit or dry suit for insulation against the cold, and fins for propulsion. These beings had none of that. They had no scuba tanks, no air hoses, no bulky equipment of any kind. They appeared to be breathing the water itself. And yet, they moved with a speed and agility that was impossible for a human in clumsy diving gear. They were perfectly adapted to this deep, cold, high-pressure environment. The divers hovered in the water, frozen in a state of shock and disbelief. They watched as the 3 giant beings swam past them. The creatures' heads were also bizarre. They were described as being large and spherical, and they were encased in what looked like a round, transparent helmet. But again, there were no hoses or tubes connecting these helmets to any kind of air supply. The beings seemed to be aware of the divers, but they showed no signs of aggression or fear. They simply swam by, their movements powerful and serene, before disappearing into the crushing darkness of the deeper parts of the lake. The entire encounter lasted only a few minutes, but for the 7 men who witnessed it, it was a moment that would alter the course of their lives, and for some, end them. Stunned and confused, they aborted their training mission and immediately returned to the surface, their minds reeling from the impossible sight they had just witnessed. When the divers broke the surface and were brought back on board their support vessel, they were in a state of extreme agitation. They immediately reported what they had seen to their commander, a high-ranking naval officer. The commander listened to their incredible story with a mixture of skepticism and intense interest. 7 of his best men, his most disciplined and reliable soldiers, were all telling the exact same unbelievable story. It was not a case of a single diver having a hallucination. It was a shared, corroborated sighting. The commander was a man of the Cold War, a military officer conditioned to think in terms of threats and technological advantages. His mind did not immediately leap to the idea of aliens or lake monsters. Instead, he jumped to a different but equally alarming conclusion. He believed that his men had just encountered a new and highly advanced form of technology, likely a team of secret experimental combat divers from a rival power, probably the United States. He thought the silvery suits and the lack of breathing apparatus were evidence of a technological capability that was far beyond anything the Soviet Union possessed. And in the paranoid logic of the Cold War, the discovery of a rival's secret weapon was a matter of extreme national security. He knew he had to get his hands on it. This is the moment where the story turns from a strange and mysterious encounter into a tragic and fatal one. The commander, acting on his assumption that he was dealing with a foreign military asset, made a rash and ultimately catastrophic decision. He ignored the standard rigid safety protocols that govern all deep diving operations. His military objective to capture a piece of this new technology overrode all other considerations. He assembled the same team of 7 divers and gave them a new, direct, and incredibly dangerous order. They were to go back down, find the strange humanoid beings, and capture one of them. He wanted a prisoner. He wanted to bring one of the silvery figures back to the surface for interrogation and study. The divers, despite their training and their own fear, were soldiers. They had to obey the orders of their commanding officer. They prepared their gear once more, their minds likely a swirl of confusion, fear, and adrenaline. They were being sent back into the abyss to hunt a creature that they could not understand. They descended again into the cold, dark waters of Lake Baikal. They reached the 50-meter mark and began to search. And, according to the accounts, they found the beings again. The 3 giant, silvery humanoids were still in the area. The divers, following their orders, began to close in, preparing to use a large net to try and ensnare one of the creatures. They began their pursuit. And then something went horribly wrong. As the divers moved to intercept the beings, they were suddenly and violently repelled. The story, as told by the survivors and pieced together from later reports, is that the creatures emitted some kind of powerful, invisible force. It was described as a concussive wave, a sudden and powerful blast of energy that erupted from the beings. This unknown force caught the 7 divers and propelled them, with incredible speed, from the 50-meter depth directly to the surface. It was the ultimate diving nightmare. Anyone with even a basic knowledge of scuba diving understands the mortal danger of a rapid, uncontrolled ascent. As the diver goes deeper, the immense pressure of the water causes nitrogen gas to dissolve into their bloodstream. If they ascend too slowly, this nitrogen can safely and gradually be expelled through breathing. But if they ascend too quickly, the sudden drop in pressure causes the nitrogen to violently bubble out of their blood, like the fizz when you open a bottle of soda. This condition is known as decompression sickness, or the bends. It is an agonizing and often fatal condition. The nitrogen bubbles can block blood flow, damage tissues, and cause excruciating pain, paralysis, convulsions, and death. The 7 Soviet divers were shot to the surface in a matter of seconds. The physiological consequences were immediate and catastrophic. When the support crew on the surface pulled them from the water, they were in a horrific state. All 7 men were suffering from severe, acute decompression sickness. 3 of the divers died on the spot, their bodies racked with the agonizing effects of the bends. The other 4 were alive, but they were horrifically injured. The rapid ascent had caused permanent, life-altering damage to their bodies and their nervous systems. They were crippled, paralyzed for life. In a matter of minutes, a routine training mission had turned into a fatal disaster. 7 of the Soviet Navy's most elite soldiers had been taken out, not by an enemy weapon, but by an unknown force from the depths of Lake Baikal. The commander's reckless attempt to capture one of the beings had resulted in the decimation of his own team. The aftermath of this tragic incident was swift and shrouded in secrecy. The event was immediately classified as top secret by the highest levels of the Soviet military and the KGB. The official records were buried. The surviving 4 divers, now permanently disabled, were effectively silenced. They were debriefed, sworn to absolute secrecy under threat of severe punishment, and then quietly pensioned off, left to live out their lives in obscurity, forever haunted by what they had seen and what had happened to their comrades. The official story, if one was ever created, would have been a simple training accident. The world would never know the truth. For decades, the story of the giant humanoids of Lake Baikal remained a hidden piece of Cold War history, a secret file buried deep within the archives of a collapsed empire. It was not until the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s that the story began to leak out. With the new era of glasnost, or openness, many previously classified documents began to see the light of day, and many former military officials, now free from the fear of the KGB, began to speak about the strange and unexplained events they had witnessed during their service. The story of the 1982 Lake Baikal incident was one of these stories that emerged from the shadows. Researchers and journalists who specialized in Russian UFO phenomena, men like Paul Stonehill and Philip Mantle, began to piece together the account from declassified fragments, anonymous whistleblower testimonies, and interviews with former naval personnel who had knowledge of the event. The story was eventually published, and it quickly became one of Russia's most famous and enduring UFO legends. But the question remains: what did the divers actually see in the crushing darkness of the world's deepest lake? The story leaves us with a profound and unsettling enigma. The first and most sensational theory is, of course, that the divers had a genuine encounter with non-human beings. This is the extraterrestrial hypothesis. This theory proposes that an alien species has established a secret, underwater base deep within the unexplored trenches of Lake Baikal. The lake's immense depth, its vast, dark canyons, and its remote location would make it a perfect place for such a base, hidden far from the prying eyes of human satellites and military patrols. The 10-foot-tall beings, with their advanced suits and their ability to survive in the deep water without breathing apparatus, were the inhabitants of this space. The powerful force they used to repel the divers was some kind of advanced defensive technology, a force field or a sonic weapon. This theory is incredible, but it does account for all the bizarre details of the encounter. It also fits into a larger pattern of unexplained phenomena associated with the lake. For decades, local residents and even military personnel have reported seeing strange lights rising from the depths of the lake and flying into the sky, as well as giant, disc-shaped objects moving at incredible speeds underwater. The 1982 incident, in this view, was a rare and tragic moment when two worlds, the human and the alien, collided, with fatal consequences. A second, more skeptical explanation suggests a more terrestrial, if still highly secret, possibility. This is the theory that the divers did, in fact, encounter a team of human divers using highly advanced experimental technology. Perhaps a rival nation, or even a secret branch of the Soviet military itself, was testing a new form of underwater suit or a closed-circuit rebreather system that was so efficient it appeared as if the divers had no breathing gear. The giants could have been an optical illusion, their size distorted by the water and the strange suits they were wearing. The powerful force that repelled the divers could have been a new, non-lethal underwater weapon, designed to disable enemy frogmen. This theory has the advantage of not requiring a belief in aliens, but it still requires a belief in a level of secret technology that was decades ahead of its time. and it doesn't fully explain the reported 10-foot height of the beings. The final and most scientifically conservative explanation is that the entire event was a form of mass hallucination. The divers were operating in an extreme and disorienting environment. They were at a significant depth, in freezing cold water, a situation that can put immense physiological and psychological stress on the human body. It is possible that they suffered from some form of nitrogen narcosis, a condition that can occur during deep dives, which is known to cause altered perceptions, hallucinations, and irrational behavior. Perhaps one diver began to hallucinate, and through the power of suggestion in a high-stress environment, the others began to see the same thing. The story of their pursuit and the force that repelled them could have been a confused and panicked memory of a simple diving accident, a rapid, uncontrolled ascent that was later rationalized and embellished to explain the tragic outcome. This theory is the most mundane, but it struggles to explain how 7 elite, highly trained combat divers, all professionals at the top of their game, could have all succumbed to the exact same highly specific hallucination at the same time. And so the Lake Baikal incident remains a chilling and unresolved mystery. It is a story that sits uncomfortably on the border between a military tragedy and a paranormal event. Whatever the 7 Soviet divers saw that day in the deep, cold, silent world beneath the surface of the lake, it was real enough to cost 3 of them their lives and to leave the other 4 permanently broken. It was real enough for their commander to make a fatal command decision. And it was real enough for the entire Soviet military apparatus to classify the event as top secret and to bury the story for decades. The icy, unexplored depths of Lake Baikal continue to hold their secrets close, and the haunting story of the giant, silver-clad beings who swim in its abyss remains one of the most compelling and terrifying tales in the long and strange history of unexplained encounters. The Lake Baikal incident is a chilling and tragic story that blurs the line between a military accident and a paranormal encounter. Whatever the divers saw in the crushing darkness of the world's deepest lake, it cost them their lives and left behind a mystery that continues to haunt the icy waters, a tale of giant, silver-clad beings living in the abyss. In the jungles of Sri Lanka rises a strange, circular mountain known to locals as Alien Mountain. It is a place of ancient carvings and modern UFO sightings, a mystery that connects the deep past with the cosmic present. Our journey today takes us to the lush, tropical heart of Sri Lanka, to a place where ancient myth and modern mystery converge. In the vast, protected jungles of the Maduru Oya National Park, a strange and solitary mountain rises from the surrounding plains. It is not a jagged, imposing peak like the others in the region. It is a massive, circular, and almost perfectly flat-topped monolith of rock, a geological anomaly that looks for all the world like a giant, natural landing pad. For centuries, the local villagers have looked upon this place with a mixture of reverence and fear. They have their own name for it, Danigala, but in recent years it has earned a new, more provocative nickname. It is now known as Alien Mountain. This name was not given lightly. It is the result of a strange convergence of ancient art and modern phenomena, a place that is home to both mysterious prehistoric rock carvings and persistent modern-day UFO sightings. It is a place that forces us to ask a profound question. Is this mountain just a sacred site for an ancient people? Or could it be something more, a cosmic beacon, an ancient airport for visitors from another world? The first part of this enigma is the mountain itself. Danigala is a truly unique geological formation. Its distinctive, flattened, circular shape makes it stand out dramatically from the surrounding landscape. It looks artificial, almost as if a giant hand had pressed down upon a normal mountain and flattened its summit. This unique shape alone is enough to make it a place of natural wonder. But for the local people who have lived in its shadow for generations, Danigala has always been much more than just a strange rock. It is a sacred place, a place of immense spiritual power. Local folklore is rich with stories about the mountain. Some legends connect it to the great Hindu epic, the Ramayana, claiming it was a place visited by the demon king Ravana, who was said to possess a flying machine called the Danduman Era. Other stories speak of it as the home of powerful local deities and nature spirits. For centuries, it has been a place of pilgrimage and ritual, a natural temple in the heart of the jungle. But it is the modern stories that have earned Danigala its alien mountain nickname. For decades, local villagers and even park rangers have reported seeing strange and unexplained phenomena in the skies around the mountain's summit. The reports are remarkably consistent. They speak of strange, silent lights that hover over the flat top of the mountain at night. They describe objects that move at incredible speeds and perform impossible, non-ballistic maneuvers, making sharp, right-angled turns that defy the known laws of physics. Some have even reported seeing disc-shaped or triangular craft ascending from or descending towards the mountain's summit, as if the flat top were some kind of active runway or portal. These sightings are so common in the area that the mountain has become a hotspot for UFO researchers and enthusiasts in Sri Lanka. They are drawn to this place, believing that its unique shape and its ancient, sacred energy act as a kind of beacon, attracting visitors from other worlds. While these modern UFO sightings are, by their very nature, anecdotal and unproven, they create a fascinating context for the second, and much older, part of the mountain's mystery, the ancient art that is hidden on its slopes. Long before the first reports of strange lights in the sky, Danigala was a place of deep human significance. As archaeologists began to explore the mountain, they discovered that its rocky slopes were riddled with caves and rock shelters. And on the walls of these shelters, they found a vast and mysterious gallery of ancient rock art. Thousands of prehistoric petroglyphs images carved or pecked into the surface of the rock adorn the walls, a silent, enigmatic message from a long-lost people. The age of these carvings is difficult to determine with absolute precision, but archaeological evidence suggests that some of them could be over 5,000 years old, dating back to the late Neolithic or early Iron Age. They are the work of a prehistoric indigenous culture, likely the ancestors of the modern-day Veda people, the Aboriginal inhabitants of Sri Lanka. But this is not typical rock art. While some of the carvings depict recognizable scenes of hunting or familiar animals, the vast majority of them are strange, abstract, and deeply puzzling. The walls are covered in complex geometric patterns, circles, spirals, grids, and strange ladder-like shapes. There are depictions of human-like figures, but they are often highly stylized and bizarre. They have strange, elongated bodies, large, round heads, and sometimes what appear to be antennae or helmets. They do not look like normal human beings. The meaning of these thousands of symbols is a profound mystery. They are unlike any other rock art found in Sri Lanka, or indeed in most of South Asia. They seem to represent a unique and complex symbolic system, a visual language whose key has been lost to time. It is this strange ancient art, when combined with the mountain's unique shape and the persistent modern UFO sightings, that creates the core of the Danigala enigma. The mountain seems to be a place where the strange and the unexplained are not just a modern phenomenon, but have been a part of its story for thousands of years. The petroglyphs are a message from the deep past, but what are they trying to tell us? This is where the great divide in interpretation occurs, the same divide we see at so many other mysterious ancient sites around the world. We are faced with two competing narratives, two completely different ways of reading the signs on the rock. On one side, we have the measured, evidence-based interpretation of mainstream archaeology. On the other, we have the speculative, and for many far more exciting interpretation of the ancient alien theorists. To solve the mystery of Alien Mountain, we must listen to both stories and weigh their claims. Let's begin with the archaeological view. For a mainstream archaeologist, the carvings on Danigala are not evidence of extraterrestrial contact. They are a precious and fascinating glimpse into the mind of a prehistoric human culture. The people who made these carvings were not primitive or simple. They had a rich and complex inner world, a sophisticated way of understanding the cosmos, and they used this art to express their most profound beliefs. The first question an archaeologist would ask is, who were these people? The most likely candidates are the ancient ancestors of the Veda people. The Veda are the indigenous inhabitants of Sri Lanka, a people with a unique genetic and cultural lineage that stretches back thousands of years. They have traditionally been a forest-dwelling hunter-gatherer society, and their spiritual beliefs are deeply animistic, meaning they see a life force or a spirit in all things animals, plants, rocks, and rivers. The location of the Danigala petroglyphs, deep within traditional Veda territory, strongly suggests a connection to this ancient culture. The next and more difficult question is, what do the symbols mean? From an archaeological perspective, the strange figures and abstract patterns are likely connected to the practice of shamanism. As we saw with the Siberian birdman, shamanism is an ancient spiritual tradition that is found in many hunter-gatherer societies around the world. The shaman is the spiritual specialist who enters a trance state to journey into the spirit world. And the art they create is often a map or a record of these visionary experiences. The strange, elongated, human-like figures on the walls of Danigala might not be depictions of aliens. They could be depictions of the shamans themselves, their bodies distorted and transformed during their ecstatic journeys. The geometric patterns, the spirals, the grids, the dots are also a common feature of shamanic art worldwide. Neuroscientists who have studied the effects of trance states on the human brain have found that our brains are hardwired to produce these kinds of geometric hallucinations, which are known as entoptic phenomena. The patterns that the Danigala artists carved into the rock may have been a literal physiological representation of what they were seeing with their inner eye during a deep trance. In this interpretation, the rock shelters of Danigala were not just homes. They were sacred spaces, portals to another dimension. They were the places where the shamans would go to perform their rituals, perhaps aided by the use of hallucinogenic plants, to enter the spirit world. The carvings they left behind were their travelogues, their maps of the spiritual cosmos. The strange figures were the spirits they encountered on their journeys. The geometric patterns were the very fabric of the spirit world itself. The art is not a record of an external physical event, but of an internal spiritual one. It is a testament to the profound and complex inner life of these ancient people. The archaeological view does not see aliens in the rock art. It sees the universal human quest for meaning, the timeless desire to connect with a world that lies beyond the veil of our ordinary senses. But for the proponents of the ancient alien theory, this interpretation is far too mundane. They look at the same set of evidence, the uniquely shaped mountain and the strange rock art, and they see a completely different story. For them, the archaeological explanation is just another example of a conservative scientific establishment trying to explain away evidence that it cannot comprehend. They believe the clues at Danigala point to a much more direct and literal conclusion. Their argument begins with the mountain itself. They see the name Alien Mountain not as a modern nickname, but as an ancient truth. They argue that the mountain's unique, circular, flat-topped shape is not a natural geological coincidence. It is too perfect, too symmetrical. They propose that it is either a deliberately modified natural feature or an entirely artificial one. They see it as a purpose-built structure, designed to serve a specific function, and that function they believe was as a landing pad, a celestial airport for extraterrestrial spacecraft. In this view, the mountain was a beacon, its unique shape making it easily identifiable from the sky. The persistent modern UFO sightings are, for them, proof that the site is still active, that it is still being used as a navigational marker or a landing zone by visitors from other worlds. The modern sightings are not a new phenomenon. They are just the latest chapter in a very, very old story. Then they turn their attention to the petroglyphs. They reject the shamanic interpretation as a convenient and unprovable assumption. Instead, they argue for a more direct, literal reading of the images. When they look at the strange humanoid figures with their large heads, their thin bodies, and their big eyes, they do not see a human in a trance. They see a literal portrait of an alien being, a classic gray, or some other form of extraterrestrial visitor. The strange helmets or antennae are not symbolic. They are pieces of alien technology. The carvings are not a record of a spiritual journey. They are a form of eyewitness testimony. They are the ancient equivalent of a modern-day UFO witness sketching what they saw. The ancient people of Danigala, they argue, were recording a real physical encounter with beings who were not of this world. They interpret the abstract geometric symbols in the same literal way. The circles and dots are not entoptic phenomena. They are star maps, charts of the alien visitor's home solar system, or perhaps diagrams of planetary orbits. The ladder-like shapes are not spiritual symbols of ascent. They are diagrams of DNA, or perhaps representations of a technological device. The entire collection of petroglyphs is seen as a kind of cosmic message board, a transfer of knowledge from an advanced alien civilization to a primitive human one. The aliens, they propose, used Danigala as a base or a meeting point, and they taught the local humans about astronomy, science, and the cosmos. The rock art is the last, faded remnant of this ancient education. In this grand, extraterrestrial narrative, the people who made the carvings were not the authors of a complex spiritual belief system. They were simply the students, the scribes, the witnesses. They were a cargo cult, worshipping the powerful sky gods, who descended upon their mountain in flying machines. The entire mystery of Danigala is solved in one elegant stroke. The mountain is an alien airport. The art is a depiction of the aliens and their technology, and the modern UFO sightings are proof that the visitors are still coming back. The two interpretations could not be more polarized. One sees the art as an expression of the inner world of the human mind. The other sees it as a record of the outer world of the cosmos. One celebrates the complexity of human culture and spirituality. The other suggests that our greatest leaps in knowledge have been given to us by an outside intelligence. One is a story about us. The other is a story about them. The great challenge in solving the mystery of Danigalan Mountain is the lack of definitive, testable evidence that can cleanly separate these two worlds of thought. The petroglyphs are thousands of years old, and their creators left no written language to explain their meaning. We are forced to interpret them through the lens of our own beliefs and assumptions. An archaeologist, trained to see the world through the patterns of human culture, will naturally see shamanism and ritual. A ufologist, trained to see the world through the patterns of unexplained aerial phenomena, will naturally see aliens and star maps. The Rorschach test of the rock art allows both narratives to exist. Until a new piece of evidence is discovered, a buried artifact that is clearly non-terrestrial, or a newly discovered cultural text that can act as a Rosetta Stone for the symbols, the debate will likely continue. The enigma of Alien Mountain is a perfect mystery, a place where the ancient human quest for the divine meets the modern human quest for the cosmic. It is a place that reminds us that the line between a spiritual vision and a physical encounter, between a god and an astronaut, is sometimes as thin and as mysterious as a line carved on a stone 5,000 years ago. Mountain remains a place where myth and reality meet. Is it the sacred site of a lost ancient culture, or a cosmic airport for visitors from another world? The answer remains hidden in the rock. If the past still whispers to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Ancient Relics Keeper, because some mysteries were never meant to be buried.